the video. You clicked on it. We came.
It's just a YouTube video.
Now you must like and subscribe, and we will show you great pleasures beyond reason. Make sure to turn on the notifications bell to be updated on Ghoulif's next upload. And maybe share this video around, because that's pretty cool.
Trigger warning for anyone who is bad with gore or descriptions of gore. Not sure how much I'll be able to show, but I will be describing things, so if it's not your thing, stop now. So I just watched Hellraiser and Hellraiser, with it being the spookiest time of the year. And with the release of a brand new Hellraiser, I thought might be a good excuse to watch the original for the first time since I haven't seen it, and just lump the two together and review them in one video. Oh, by the way, I'm going to be spoiling both of these movies, so get out now if you have not seen Hellraiser 1987 or Hellraiser 2022. The original Hellraiser is written and directed by Clive Barker, who also wrote the original book the film is based on. This movie has some cool stuff in it, but I don't think it's very good. I think it has a great premise for a horror movie. The concept of rebuilding a corpse in the spare room of your house, and Julia having to lure men to the house to slaughter them as a way to rebuild her former lover, is a very engaging plot hook. I do find it very funny that the Pinhead character is so iconic, because they are barely in this movie. They're actually part of an ensemble cast of torture beings known as Cenobites. The Cenobites are the most memorable part of the series, with Pinhead being the most iconic. The designs of these Cenobites are the reason they become more forthright in the sequels later on and become more of a focus. Pinhead isn't actually the name of this character though. That's just something the makeup design crew gave it on set, and the director didn't even like this name. Now, the Cenobites are the pursuing force of the film and are after one of the main characters, but they only have about 8 minutes of screen time here as well. Now, it does truly fascinate me that Pinhead is viewed and remembered in the same way as people remember Jason Voorhees or Freddy Krueger or a Michael Myers, that being an iconic horror slasher villain. Pinhead is not. Watching Hellraiser, you'll notice Pinhead isn't even a slasher villain. Pinhead and the rest of the Cenobites are not really villains at all. They're merely observers who are called to act and under instruction of the lament configuration, which is this little f***ed-up box. In the scene shown where victims are being tortured, the performances of the Cenobites are so reserved and cold and pulled back in a way, which leaves you with a very unsettling feeling.
Oh man, don't break Cotton!
Oh, yes.
He escaped you!
Nobody escapes us.
The practical effects showcased in this film are for the most part immaculate. Best looking effect is that of Frank forming out of the floorboards and the later evolutions of that character's design. Practical effects like these are so incredible because of how real they feel. I don't mean real in the way that it's real gore happening on screen, but that it is tangibly there on screen that the actors can see and interact with, because whenever hooks are seen going through someone's flesh, it doesn't really look real, but they feel real because of the sound design and performances, and that's what really matters. It's frustrating to go back to this era of films and see such beautiful work done, and to rarely see work like this be done today. They usually just cover it with CGI most of the time. Hellraiser has a very memorable score that really allows the visuals to jump off the screen. Christopher Young does a great job with the composition, and it especially stood out to me during the scene of Frank's gruesome skeletal resurrection. This movie has some of the worst dubbing I have ever seen. At times, I thought I was watching the wrong movie. It was so terrible. The explanation I found is that the movie had a lot of British cast members that were dubbed over with American actors so that the movie would sell better in the States. This, however, leads to some incredibly bad dubbing that makes me think I'm watching a parody.
Well, can I come in or not?
You're very welcome.
Yeah. Well, that's nice to know.
My lucky day. That your daughter?
Uh-huh.
Got her mother's looks.
I implore you to reconsider.
I do have a great appreciation for the quality of practical effects, and unfortunately in the latter half of this film, the practical effects begin to slip. There's a scene where Kirsty is being chased down a hallway by a big creature, and the puppet they used looks like an attraction you'd find at Spirit Halloween. You can even see the crew members pushing the cart at certain points. The last shot is especially bad. I do understand that they only had a few weeks to craft such a large model, but it's still in the movie and therefore negatively affects it. I wouldn't really say I was scared while watching this, but what I can say is the existential fear is very apparent. The idea of having beings of of unknown origin claim you and proceed to inflict unimaginable pain on you for an eternity is absolutely horrifying. You know the kernel of dread you get in the pit of your stomach when something truly awful is going to happen to a character? I really felt that when Kirsty opened the box. Although it is a shame that when the climax of the movie happens, the lament configuration just starts kind of randomly defeating the Cenobites somehow. This was never established at any point of the film, and I get that the idea is we don't really understand the Cenobites, and the box is also alien in a really similar way, but people seem to solve it really easily. Kirsty just starts sucking up Cenobites with the box like this is fucking Ghostbusters. The world building of Hellraiser is really fascinating, and I don't feel like Clive Barker had the means to really explore a lot of the ideas he had bouncing around in his head. Like the final shot, for example, Clive Barker really wanted that in there to have a big ending reveal, but did not have the proper time or budget to be able to pull off such a complicated practical effect. There's this kind of layer of ambiguity to the Cenobites, but when I see one of these creatures from their world being pushed by a cart, it kind of pulls me out of it. I can see the valiant effort put forth, and now having seen it, I understand why it is seen as one of the many iconic horror films of the 80s, but I appreciate it more than I actually like it. Cool designs, interesting world building, and horror concepts, but the story isn't really strong enough to make me want to rewatch it. 6 out of 10. When this movie was announced, I didn't really have any idea what Hellraiser was actually about. I had never seen the original, and I was only familiar with the design of Pinhead. The only reason I had any real interest in watching this was because of the director attached. I don't know how many of you are familiar with his work, but David Bruckner is an incredibly talented up-and-coming director. I discovered this director through a recommendation from Adam from YMS. David Bruckner has directed some very well-made horror movies. He's most likely more well-known for his work with horror short films, those being the first segment for VHS, his segment from Southbound, and a segment from The Signal. Unfortunately, I have not seen The Signal yet, but his segments from VHS and Southbound are by far the best shorts in both of those movies. His feature directorial debut was The Ritual, which is a very creepy and atmospheric film with incredibly irritating characters. The letdown of that movie was definitely its poor writing. The direction and creature design were by far the best aspects of that film. Bruckner's next feature film is much better than The Ritual, and that's because he actually had a good writing team. The Night House has a really great lead character who makes realistic decisions, which I know isn't much, but in today's horror, that is a rarity. The tone and atmosphere are also on point here, which leads to a lot of creativity when it comes to its horror. The only failing of this for me is the ending and how it feels very unsatisfactory, but who knows, maybe I'll feel different on a rewatch. For this new Hellraiser, David Bruckner would be dipping his toes into franchise filmmaking. It seems that the Hellraiser franchise has had a rough go in these last few decades. I've only seen the original, but people seem to enjoy the second and third films, but after the initial trilogy, the series takes a hard dive into direct-to-DVD, Walmart bargain bin quality.
Yes, sex has its limits, and this will take you beyond those limits, yes, to pleasures you can't even begin to imagine. Sensual pain.
Hang on. Pain? What, like bondage and shit?
This new Hellraiser was given an actual chance to succeed. It has a great director and a seemingly sizable budget with a solid writing team, with one wildcard. David S. Goyer is a writer that is part of great projects and horrible projects. I don't really know if he's a good writer, a bad writer, or just lucky. This new film takes some of the surface level aspects from the original and greatly expands upon them. The lament configuration is expanded in a multitude of ways. It's not just a puzzle box, it is a puzzle box that has 6 configurations, with each configuration representing a desire. The mechanics of the box have also been updated, that when it has a configuration solved, it cuts the person holding it, or at least attempts to. This looks very painful. When the box is completely solved and turns into the Leviathan configuration, you are granted a desire represented by each of the configurations. The new Cenobites are incredible. The designs are so gruesome and are absolutely beautiful. Beautiful in a way that one may look at high fashion on a runway and not really understand it. Except this runway is filled with flayed skin. The design seems to have taken the idea of skin as leather, and parts of the flayed flesh are almost treated as clothing to the Cenobites. I like the design of the original Cenobites from the '87 movie, but the leather Matrix jumpsuits look really funny to me. The most interesting part of those original designs are the flesh. and the faces, and the new film understood this and reinvented it. I particularly love the idea that Pinhead's skirt is made of their peeled flesh from their legs. My personal favorite has to be the Weeper, with its arms splitting down the middle to reveal threads going through its arms. There's also a more cohesive design motif to the Cenobites as a whole. Each Cenobite has aspects of the Lament configuration embedded into their bodies that makes them feel as though they are united in a really up way. The performance given by the Cenobites is unique to that of the original. The Cenobites seem to crave the torture they give. It's almost sexual to them. When Nora is praying to God for salvation, Pinhead is disgusted at the thought of it.
What it feel like? A joyful note without change, without end.
Jamie Clayton was an excellent casting choice for Pinhead. She truly embodies the character and makes it her own. I think I prefer the barely restrained feral performance of the newer Cenobites over the original. I still like the original decision to have them very held back, but I think this is more fun to watch. The cinematography done by Eli Bourne is so well done. Whenever the box is activated, the world itself begins to shift and stretch. It's opening up another dimension into our own world, and it doesn't care where it's going to open. When a victim is claimed in a moving van, the van stretches into nothingness. The front cab vanishes into darkness only to leave a darkened stone hallway. During death scenes, the camera does not veer away from showing what is happening to the human body. There's a particular shot of the inside of someone's throat with a needle going through it that made my skin crawl. I was a little worried that the film would rely too heavily on CG for the kills and gore shots, but to my surprise, a lot of the effects are practical. Some of them do look enhanced with VFX, but it is not dragging them down, it is enhancing them, and they look beautiful. When Roland Voigt's body is reforming, you can see the spinal column relocking itself as the muscle tendons form around it. Just incredible stuff. A couple of the characters are pretty forgettable. As soon as they're introduced, the majority I just thought, well, gotta have people to kill. It's a horror movie after all. But the lead, Riley, played by Odessa Azion, was really great. She was actually believable as someone going through their own personal struggles with addiction. The other characters didn't have too much of a focus, but with Odessa being the best performance of the characters, I'm glad they focused on her. There are small moments in this that just make characters feel like real people. I know it's a really small detail, but when I see someone typing on a computer, they usually misspell things, and having someone type on the computer and just have autocorrect fill in the rest of the text is a tiny but realistic detail to add in that a person would actually do. I did it writing the script. Tackling the points of people embracing that carnal side of themselves and the obsession with pleasure and sensation are touched on somewhat in the original, but never really explored on more than a surface level. The two that represent it are Frank and Julia, with them being built around the plot hook. Julie wants to resurrect Frank because they were having an affair together and she desires to sleep with him again. The other side is Frank, who literally seeked out the Lament configuration in the beginning to seek out great pleasures. In this new film, the main character Riley is an alcoholic and a drug addict. We see multiple times Riley using sex, drugs, and alcohol to avoid real life and to distract from what's going on around her when things get tough. She uses pleasure to numb the pain. Her brother kicks her out of the house, so she goes to the park and gets high. Her brother goes missing, and when Colin is trying to get information from her, she leaves to go have sex with Trevor. The main antagonist, Roland Voight, has a similar goal that Frank had in the original. Voight seeks to get a wish from the Leviathan and chooses sensation. One thing you should know about the Leviathan is that it's very similar to a genie, where they like to flip around your wish in a real dickish way. It's usually going to be some horrible way to torture the person making the wish. You wish for sensation, so the Leviathan bestows a mechanized device that constantly keeps your nerves on fire and never lets you get used to it.
Genies. They tell you to wish for anything you want, and then they add some terrible twist, like you wish to jump high, so he turns you into a frog. What? Why? Who gains from this?
When Riley finally gains the ability to make a wish, she denies it and does not wish for anything. This in its own way is a configuration, the Lament configuration. Riley now has to live a life knowing everything she has done and die knowing that she has hurt those around her with her substance abuse, just like she has hurt them inadvertently with the box. All in all, I really loved this movie. It gave me more of what I wanted from the original, and the things I liked in the original were further explored, like the world building showcased and the theme of the movie itself. I don't know if everyone will gel with what's shown here, but I think it was awesome. The runtime might not sit well with some. It is a bit long, but I thought it was well paced. Every time I thought it might drag, the movie always picked up and kept me interested. The makeup and character design were superb. The music was a fun reinvention of the original theme. The sound design was really nasty and wet, particularly the first kill of the film, which has a really great combination of sound design and cinematography that is so effective. I cannot wait to see David Bruckner's next project because this guy has a really good future as a horror filmmaker. 8 out of 10.